Your unique story, our global audience. Global One Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global One Media's exclusive one-on-one interviews with company executives sharing insights into their unique journey. This is a platform to help investors make informed decisions. I'm your host, Ashley Berry, and today, Dr. James Tansey, CEO of Klimat X, is with us. The carbon credit developer company is focused on producing large-scale carbon credits from nature-based solutions. Really a great mission. They have a strong commitment to protecting and restoring our natural systems. They're listed on the TSXV as KLX. Dr. Tansey, welcome.
Good morning.
So let's jump right in. Perhaps you could begin by providing an overview of Klimat X along with its mission and vision.
For sure. So the company was started a couple of years ago, although I've been involved in carbon credits and nature-based solutions since about 2006. And the company was started because we wanted to respond to this huge volume of demand coming from large final emitters who've made net zero commitments. Some of the largest technology and resource companies in the world have made these net zero commitments. And what that means is they're committed to measuring their emissions, reducing them where they can, and then purchasing nature-based solutions, carbon credits for the balance of their emissions. And what we recognized was that the volume of production in the market at this stage, or 2 years ago, at least when we started, was just too small scale. It was really like small artisanal hobby projects that were producing tons from maybe a couple of thousand hectares of land, and that to meet the demand from the 15-fold growth and the size of the market that all of the studies have indicated we'll see by 2030, so growing to a $30 billion market by 2030, we needed to change the approach. So the way that we changed that was to say, well, when you develop other natural resources like oil and gas resources or mining resources, you get a concession from the government, you get an agreement with the government that you have the rights to exploration and development. And we saw carbon credits and nature-based solutions exactly the same way. So we go in and we arrange jurisdictional level agreements at the state level or the national level. We sign those agreements, we go in and do the exploration and development work with our own equity. And then once the projects are de-risked, we go to large buyers and we say, okay, do you want to pre-purchase these tons? Do you want to invest alongside us to implement the project, whether that's mangrove restoration or reforestation or conservation work? We de-risk the projects and then we pre-sell them to large buyers. And that's a very different model than almost anyone else in the market. And we placed a bet that the big buyers would want to buy in very large volumes from the projects and get early exposure. And it's turned out that that's true. So we've announced we're our first large term sheet that will be binding and will implement and continue to implement the project we've been working on in Sierra Leone. So it's a major milestone over the next month to prove out that model and show the market this can work. The benefits to investors are that our equity at risk is really just the investment to de-risk the project. And in our first project in Sierra Leone, we'll have invested maybe $2.5 million by the time we're done to de-risk a project that produces $460 million of revenue over the 30-year lifespan of the project. Assuming everything goes well, assuming we manage the implementation risk, but that's a very powerful model from an investor's perspective in terms of return on equity.
Oh, fantastic. So you touched on the uniqueness. You're talking about the process, the scalability, the innovation, really. I'd be very interested to hear a little bit more about, the project specifically that you're working on, as well as maybe what you're planning for in the future.
So the jurisdictions we're active in Sierra Leone, in West Africa. We're expanding in West Africa to countries like Liberia and Guinea because it's very similar growing conditions. We're also in Yucatan, the state of Yucatan in Mexico. We're in Guyana, and we have a national agreement in Suriname too. The type of project, our first projects in Sierra Leone, the most advanced ones, the first is rewilding, which means replanting native species. We gather seeds from the forest, we work with local communities, and we plant on a very large scale the native species back into areas that have been heavily degraded from coconut plantations, from palm oil, from rubber plantations, and from agriculture. And we pay the local smallholders a lease to replant on their land, and we hire them to work on it. And so we have 57,000 hectares of land that are ready for planting in that country. We also have mangrove projects, so protecting mangroves from degradation. For people cut down mangroves for firewood, which is just a sort of indication of the poverty levels in the country. But we also restore mangrove areas that have either been degraded or converted to rice paddies. So we have about 10,000 hectares in Sierra Leone that we're looking at the moment. And similar models in Yucatan, restoration and protection of mangroves, reforesting and rewilding projects along those lines. So we get dirt under our fingernails. We have operational teams in country. We are the owner operator of these assets because we think that's important for quality control. But we're very actively involved in project implementation.
Such an incredibly noble mission, perhaps. And thank you for explaining that. As I said, all I can think of is noble mission, because what you're doing is so important for the environment. Perhaps you can quantify the specific impact your projects have on the amount of actual carbon in the atmosphere, and maybe shed some light on the current demand for the carbon credits that you offer.
So if you look at the global challenge of meeting climate goals, we're at around 40 billion tons of emissions a year. From all sources, and we need to reduce that by as much as 60% to stabilize global temperatures. People get into debates about whether you should do reductions or technology or carbon capture and storage or nature-based solutions, as though there's a debate about, a competition between all of those things for which one's the best. We actually need to do all of those things. We need to do technological change, emissions reductions, nature-based solutions. The reason we focus on nature-based solutions is, global deforestation and land degradation is about 20% of emissions every year. So it's much, much larger than the impact of aviation and the cement industry, 5 times the size of the cement industry from deforestation. Most of that deforestation is concentrated in a small number of tropical countries, less than 10 countries. So we take the view that as one major intervention, the idea that we could go into the market and show that you can stop and reverse deforestation. If we could show 20% reduction in emissions over a 10-year period, that's technically completely feasible. And the governments of the world through the UN process have failed to deliver on that for the last 15 or 20 years. They've never got to a resolution. And we think the private sector can do it. We think the big buyers can intervene, can work on the ground, can be nimble and agile. And our proof of concept in these countries shows that, we can move capital from some of the largest emitters in the world into the prevention and reversion of deforestation. Now, the big number is if you prevented all global tropical deforestation and reversed deforestation in some of these areas, we could get up to 40% of emissions reductions, right? So if we're looking at 60% emissions reductions, what we're trying to show is that this is viable. We can move the funds. We can start taking action on it. And, maybe government catches up one day or the UN catches up. But our ambition is in the areas where we're active to take on entire countries, focus on conservation and focus on restoration across hundreds of thousands of hectares, and just prove to the world that it can be done and that we can, get away from this pessimism about climate change and say, this is a problem humanity can solve.
Yes, given that you see that, you have the foresight to see that this is possible. Do you have any sense of timeline as far as where you might be able to see those numbers?
Yeah, in terms of our project implementation, we for each hectare we plant in Sierra Leone, for instance, they sequester 10 to 12 tons per hectare of carbon. So we need to do a lot of hectares to get up to the millions of tons. We're somewhere around 40 million tons of reductions in our pipeline just based on 1 year of work, and we'd like to do 1 billion tons. That's our sort of big ambitious goal, and we think that that's achievable. So, each area of mangrove that we conserve and protect is 400 to 600 tons per hectare of avoided emissions. So you start adding those up, and and that can, you can change things pretty quickly. I think the next decade is going to be the proof point on this, that if we haven't figured out how to do this in the next 10 years, we have much bigger problems. But we also think that, we've been able to go from a standing start in Sierra Leone around mangroves in 7 months to a stage where we're now looking at conserving 3,000 hectares. Wow. We started in Suriname in February. We've already done field visits. We've identified up to 30,000 hectares. So the interesting thing in some of these emerging economies is you can actually move really, really quickly with governments that desperately need the cash and communities that need alternative income. In a funny way, in those places, if you're a good operator, you can move really fast. People want to support this. Most of the people in Sierra Leone are living off $1 a day, so they're very happy to have work and employment and income opportunities. So we think in those regions of the world, we can move very, very quickly and establish projects in the next 2 to 3 years that produce that kind of volume.
Yeah, I would say quite substantial progress already in just that short amount of time. Perhaps you could give some insights into some of the key financial metrics that you're currently monitoring.
Yeah, so these projects are long-dated projects. What we focus on is our initial exposure on the project development side relative to what you might think of as a carbon reserve. If you had a gold mine, you think about the ounces of gold within that project and how long it would take you to extract that. In a carbon project, you look at the 30-year lifespan of the project and how many tons you could produce from that project site. So we look at our initial upfront equity, which is typically $2 to $3 million of investment to de-risk the project. Within our Sierra Leone project for the first 25,000 hectares, if we get the pricing indications we expect to get and to be able to announce soon, will be over $400 million of potential revenue. Assuming we deliver it, assuming the pricing stays the same, but based on conservative assumptions. And then in terms of the monitoring, we have both on the ground based monitoring of the projects. We have satellite based systems and drone based systems that we're installing to monitor the project sites. We look in terms of, from an investor's perspective, we look more at the IRR of the project than the net present value. So we're typically modeling IRRs in the range of 15 to 25%, which is pretty strong returns. And we look at the cumulative revenues from those projects relative to our initial equity, and that's generally how we report out on them. So we like to bring in buying partners, purchasers very early on. We like to de-risk the purchase side. So in the term sheet that we announced, we have a large corporate player that's going to invest through pre-purchase into the project to cover the capital expenditures, and they will guarantee a price for all of the balance of the tons that they purchase. So we go into this knowing how much we spent in advance, how much the project's going to cost, and knowing that we have a buyer that'll buy up to 100% of the tons.
Mm. So given your mission, clean environment, thinking about the audience, potential investors, current investors, how would you convince them or let them know, aside from everything you've already said, which is pretty powerful, any catalysts that investors or potential investors should anticipate or know about in the near future?
Well, we've announced that we have a hard stop date of the middle of June for finalizing our binding term sheet for the Sierra Leone project, the initial investment, the right of first refusal, for the remaining 25,000 hectares. And we anticipate being able to make an announcement on that very shortly. That will be a milestone project from a project structure perspective. I don't think anyone has done a project at this scale with a Fortune 100 company that goes from the upstream development and operating work all the way through to selling to the large final partners. Most other project developers sell to traders and intermediaries and funds. And what we've done is say, well, let's go directly to the large final emitters. So that's absolutely critical for us. We'll see that. We'll be able to speak to that milestone. We've announced what our pathway is over the next 6 months for other projects. So expect to announce the final agreement with the state of Yucatan for 25,000 hectares of mangrove restoration. We expect to announce progress on our mangrove sites in Sierra Leone, and then the first phase of the Suriname project. And if you look at our press releases, those are all foreshadowed in the roadmap update we put out a month ago.
Sounds like many positive updates in the pipeline. Dr. James Tansey, CEO of KlimatX. What a pleasure it was speaking with you today. Thank you for sharing these impressive insights, and we look forward to sharing more with our Global One audience.
Thank you so much.